Imagine waking up one morning, half awake, reaching for your usual cup of coffee, only to discover that the price has doubled overnight. The culprit? Not a drought, not inflation, but a political face-off thousands of miles away between two economic powerhouses, the United States and Brazil. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is the real risk at the heart of the latest trade standoff, threatening to reshape not just American breakfast tables, but global markets, supply chains, and the very rules of international commerce. So how did we get here? Why are the world's largest democracies on a collision course? And what could this mean for ordinary people, businesses, and the future of global trade? Let's unpack the drama, the stakes, and the possible outcomes in this high-stakes economic chess match. To understand where we are now, we need to rewind the clock and take a closer look at the tangled history between the United States and Brazil. While Brazil is the undisputed economic giant of Latin America, its relationship with the United States has always been marked by a mix of rivalry, cooperation, and occasional suspicion. Brazil's economy is incredibly diverse. It exports everything from soybeans and beef to iron ore, oil, and high-quality orange juice. But despite its size, only about 12% of Brazil's total exports actually go to the United States. That's less than half of what Brazil ships to China, which soaks up nearly 27% of all Brazilian exports. For context, Mexico, another Latin American titan, sends a jaw-dropping 80% of its exports straight north to the United States. This means that, unlike Mexico, Brazil's economic well-being is not overly tethered to American demand. Let's put some numbers on the table. The United States is a major buyer of Brazilian goods, but the total value of those exports is worth only around 1% of Brazil's entire GDP. In fact, Brazil actually runs a trade deficit with the United States. The country imports more from the United States than it sells in return. This diversified trade profile gives Brazil a certain resilience, a buffer against unilateral shocks. As one seasoned Brazilian diplomat put it, "We are a long way from having the same vulnerability that other countries have in regards to the United States." In other words, if Washington tries to twist Brazil's arm, Brazil has options. The latest episode in this saga began with an explosive move from former President Donald Trump. Citing what he called a witch hunt against his political ally, Jair Bolsonaro, Trump threatened to impose a staggering 50% tariff on all Brazilian imports. That's not just a number, it's a bombshell. Tariffs at this level would make Brazilian goods dramatically more expensive for American importers and consumers. Trump's move is unique because it openly ties international trade policy to a domestic legal battle happening in Brazil. Bolsonaro, Brazil's former far-right leader, is currently on trial for allegedly plotting a coup after losing a fiercely fought election to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil's leftist president. Lula, a union man forged in the labor struggles of the 1980s and no stranger to political fights, fired back publicly. He accused Trump of acting like an emperor and declared that Brazil would never accept foreign tutelage or interference in its sovereign affairs. This is not just a spat between two politicians. It's a confrontation between two models of global leadership, and it's putting the world's supply chains on edge. Trade experts are sharply divided on the likely fallout. Jennifer Hillman, a prominent professor at Georgetown Law and an expert in international economic law, bluntly called the tariffs pure revenge and illegal. She points out that the World Trade Organization, the international body that polices global trade rules, does not allow countries to slap tariffs on others as a form of political payback. In fact, Brazil has previously taken the United States to the WTO over trade disputes and won. The most famous case involved American cotton subsidies, where Brazil's victory forced Washington to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. But others see a more moderate impact, at least in the short term. Analysts at ARX, a respected investment firm, suggest that the macroeconomic impact on Brazil might be marginal and manageable. Their logic? Brazil's economy is simply not as dependent on the United States as many believe. Goldman Sachs, however, cautions that if the tariffs stay in place for a prolonged period, they could shave as much as 0.4% off Brazil's entire GDP. A significant blow for a developing country, but hardly a knockout punch. So who stands to lose the most if this tariff threat becomes reality? Look no further than your morning routine. The United States is the world's single largest importer of Brazilian coffee, with millions of Americans starting their day with a cup brewed from Brazilian beans. A 50% tariff would send shockwaves through the global coffee market, potentially causing prices to spike not just in the United States, but worldwide. The orange juice sector is equally vulnerable. Brazil dominates the global market for frozen concentrated orange juice, supplying over 70% of world exports. Ibiapaba Neto, executive director of Citrus BR, a leading industry group, warns that such steep tariffs would be unsustainable for Brazilian orange juice producers, who simply cannot absorb such a massive cost increase. American consumers would feel the pain at breakfast tables, but the ripple effects could hit food manufacturers, truckers, retailers, and even cafe owners across the country. But the story does not end at coffee and orange juice. Brazil's primary exports to the United States also include mineral fuels, oilseeds, ores, and meat. American companies rely on Brazilian raw materials for everything from gasoline production to processed foods. If tariffs go up, costs rise, supply chains snarl, and American businesses may be forced to seek alternative suppliers, usually at higher prices. Even American jobs could be at risk if downstream industries struggle to adapt. Wall Street analysts warn that such tit-for-tat trade wars can quickly spiral out of control, threatening not only bilateral trade, but also global supply chains and employment on both sides of the equator. Yet the real intrigue of this standoff lies in its political underpinnings. Unlike previous trade disputes, which were mostly about market access or protecting national industries, this conflict is overtly political. By linking tariffs to a domestic Brazilian trial, Trump has set a precedent that worries many. William Jackson, chief emerging markets economist at Capital Economics, notes that the political motivations make this dispute much harder to resolve. Unlike tariffs targeting Chinese steel or European cars, which can be negotiated away with quotas or side deals, this standoff involves questions of sovereignty, democracy, and the rule of law. Brazil's President Lula is in a bind. He neither has the political will nor the legal authority to interfere in the trial against Bolsonaro. Brazilian institutions, including its courts and prosecutors, are fiercely independent. Any hint of political interference could trigger a domestic backlash and even worsen Brazil's international reputation. With national elections looming in Brazil, Lula faces additional pressure. His approval ratings have slipped, and some polls suggest he could face defeat in the next presidential race. In this context, standing up to American pressure could become a rallying cry. Oliver Stuenkel, a professor of international relations at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo, believes this episode could foster a surge in Brazilian nationalism. If Lula knows how to respond well to this, it could end up strengthening him, just as it also strengthens other leaders of countries that suffer this kind of interference, Stuenkel explains. The irony is that Trump's attempt to defend his ally Bolsonaro might backfire, galvanizing Lula's supporters and painting the Brazilian far right as having invited foreign intervention. But Brazil is not without leverage. Thanks to its diversified trade portfolio, Brazil can pivot quickly if one market becomes hostile. Sources inside the Brazilian government hint that retaliation is not off the table. Brazil could impose reciprocal tariffs on American goods, targeting vulnerable sectors like wheat, aircraft, or even technology firms. Alternatively, Brazil could deepen its ties with China and other BRICS nations, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. As a founding member of BRICS, Brazil has steadily increased trade and investment with these emerging powers. In the past decade, Chinese investment in Brazil has exploded, with billions of dollars flowing into infrastructure, agriculture, and energy projects. If the United States closes its doors, China stands ready to buy even more Brazilian soybeans, beef, and minerals. A senior analyst at BTG Pactual, a major Brazilian investment bank, notes that Brazil's oil shipments can be rerouted in weeks, not months. In other words, Brazil's economic engine can quickly shift gears, minimizing the damage from American tariffs. The prospect of a full-blown trade war, however, is alarming for both countries. History offers sobering lessons. The trade tensions between the United States and China, which escalated under the Trump administration, cost the global economy as much as $1.4 trillion, according to top economists. That's an economic wound that took years to heal. While the United States-Brazil spat is smaller in scale, it could set a dangerous precedent. If rich democracies begin using tariffs to punish political adversaries, what is to stop others from doing the same? The risk is a breakdown of the rules-based international trading system, with unpredictable consequences for everyone. The impact of a trade war would extend far beyond the price of coffee or orange juice. Investors would get jittery, stock markets could swing wildly, and global supply chains might be forced to reconfigure overnight. For American farmers, Brazilian retaliation could mean lost export markets for wheat, corn, or even high-tech machinery. For Brazilian technology companies, a breakdown in relations could cut off access to American software, hardware, and investment capital. The uncertainty alone could freeze business investment, slow job creation, and sap economic growth across both continents. What are the possible scenarios from here? Let's explore two likely futures. In one scenario, both sides double down. Trump follows through on his threat, imposing an eye-watering 50% tariff on all Brazilian goods. Lula, refusing to back down, hits back with tariffs targeting American wheat, aircraft, or major tech firms. Supermarket prices in the United States climb sharply. Imagine your favorite Brazilian coffee or a glass of fresh orange juice suddenly costing twice as much. American bakeries might pay more for sugar and flour, while airline companies could face delays if Brazilian aircraft parts become scarce. Brazilian consumers, meanwhile, might see prices rise for American electronics or wheat-based foods, though the immediate pain is likely to be less severe due to Brazil's economic diversity. If this tit-for-tat escalates, the consequences could ripple across the globe. Multinational companies might rush to relocate factories or find new suppliers, disrupting jobs and investment. Global shipping firms could reroute vessels, while logistics companies scramble to adjust. Even the technology sector could feel the pinch. Imagine if Brazil restricted American tech giants in favor of Chinese alternatives. The result could be a permanent shift in supply chains, with lasting effects on prices, innovation, and global competition. Yet, there is another path. Brazil's relatively low dependence on the American market means it could simply pivot further east. Today, more than twice as much Brazilian exports go to China as to the United States. China has long sought to deepen its influence in Latin America, investing heavily in infrastructure, mining, and agriculture. If the United States slams the door, Brazil could respond by signing new trade deals with China, India, or Russia, drawing even closer to the BRICS bloc. This could mean more Chinese foreign direct investment, new technology partnerships, and a permanent reorientation of Brazil's foreign policy away from Washington's orbit. For American policymakers, this is a warning sign. If the United States uses trade as a political weapon, it risks driving key partners into the arms of its rivals. The broader geopolitical consequences could be profound. A more integrated BRICS bloc could challenge American dominance in everything from finance to technology standards. Global governance might shift toward a more multipolar order, with no single country able to dictate the rules. What does all this mean for you, the everyday consumer or business owner? First, keep an eye on your wallet. If you live in the United States, prepare for sticker shock on certain foods and drinks. Coffee, orange juice, and even some meats could see sharp price increases. For restaurants, cafes, and food manufacturers, higher input costs could force tough decisions about pricing, sourcing, or even layoffs. If you are in Brazil, the immediate impact might be less severe, but the risk of job losses in export sectors and higher prices for imported goods could mount over time. Technology access could also become an issue if sanctions or restrictions spread to digital services and hardware. For investors, the lesson is clear. Diversify your supply chains and pay close attention to political risks, not just economic fundamentals. Companies that rely heavily on single-country suppliers are exposed when politics intervene. The rise of economic nationalism and political tariffs means that even the best business plans can be upended by events far beyond your control. Historically, Brazil has shown that it can punch above its weight in global trade disputes. The World Trade Organization battle over cotton subsidies is a case in point. Brazil's skillful legal and diplomatic campaign forced the United States to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to Brazilian farmers, an unprecedented victory for a developing nation. This history gives Brazilian negotiators confidence that they can hold their own, even when facing superpowers. But the stakes are higher now. The world is in the midst of a broader shift away from a unipolar, American-dominated order toward a more fragmented, multipolar landscape. In this new era, trade disputes are no longer just about tariffs and quotas. They are about ideology, national identity, and the balance of power. As one senior Brazilian diplomat put it, "We regret this measure has been taken, but we will not suffer in the short term the brutal impact that others would." Smart countries are hedging their bets, building new alliances, and preparing for a future where no single nation calls the shots. So, is there hope for diplomacy? Most experts believe that, despite the loud threats and political theater, neither Trump nor Lula actually wants a prolonged and costly trade war. The pain would be real, But both leaders have domestic audiences to impress. Expect plenty of tough talk, maybe some reciprocal tariffs, but also a flurry of behind-the-scenes negotiations, back-channel diplomacy, and last-minute deals. In the end, the most likely outcome is a temporary standoff, followed by a face-saving compromise. Yet the scars may linger, and trust may be harder to rebuild. As the next few months unfold, keep your eyes on key signals. Are American and Brazilian diplomats meeting quietly? Is China stepping up its investments or public support for Brazil? Are multinational companies announcing changes to their supply chains? These clues will help you see which way the winds are blowing. For now, one thing is certain. Global economics is no longer just about dollars and cents. The era when trade disputes were solved over spreadsheets is over. Today, politics, personalities, and public opinion matter as much as market forces. The world is watching as Brazil and the United States stare each other down, and the outcome will shape not just breakfast tables, but the very structure of international trade for years to come. If you want to stay ahead of these global shifts, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think? Can diplomacy still win the day, or is this the beginning of a lasting economic rivalry? Drop your take in the comments below and join the conversation. Together, we will keep making sense of a world where politics